Before we begin, a quick content warning. This episode includes discussions about domestic violence, partner abuse, sexual assault, child abuse, suicidal ideation, and mental health challenges. Please listen with care. If you or someone you know is affected by these issues, consider using discretion or seeking support.
Any step in the direction of recovery is a good step. Any step you can take in the direction of getting the message that there's nothing wrong with you, that you are feeling the way we would expect anybody who's been through what you've been through to feel. And then you say to yourself, I'm with you. You're not alone. I've got you. I'm here.
Life Reimagined with Stacey Ray.
Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Shulamit Ber Levtov. As a mental health professional specializing in financial trauma and entrepreneurship, Shulamit shares her insights on the impact of financial abuse in relationships and the mental health struggles that often accompany these experiences. Hi, Shula. Thanks for joining us. I know that you have quite a life story of how you even came to heal from some of your traumas, and if not all. So I would love for you to share with me what some of those traumas have been that brought you to a place where you can even talk about this and help other women, and how your life became so different.
Thank you for asking. One of the biggest marks of healing in my mind is that before I went through my trauma healing process, I could tell you like, oh, la-di-da, this happened, that happened, like I was telling you about the weather. And that represents a kind of disconnection. Whereas now today, I can tell you that I'm a survivor of sexual assault in childhood and as an adult, that I'm also a survivor of an abusive relationship as an adult, and that I'm a survivor of trauma related to math at school. And I'm connected with myself as opposed to, oh yeah, you know, when I was a kid, blah, 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 right? Like I settled down into myself. I sometimes will give myself some comforting touch as I say it. I sense the tenderness of it when I share it. And I share fewer details now than I did. Like, for example, the trauma around math and school, I will share in more detail because it doesn't have the same emotional gut punch like talking about, let's say, sexual assault or domestic violence does, right? So it's funny. I got into my own trauma recovery by accident. I had been in therapy all my life, and in my mid-ish 30s, and I'm also a survivor of medical trauma. So I'd had meningitis, and my life kind of went into a tailspin after that. And I asked a friend for a referral to a therapist, and she sent me to a trauma therapist. So 38 years or so of being in therapy without somebody who understood trauma, it was helpful, it was supportive, it was nice, but it didn't really touch what was inside. And then later on, I went to school to get my master's in counseling and spirituality. It was never my plan when I started my trauma recovery to become a trauma therapist. When I started school, when I was 19, I started in social work. So when I was in my mid-40s and decided to think about going back to school, it made sense to go back where I started, but I wasn't thinking, oh, I'm a trauma survivor, I'll help trauma survivors. I was like, no, there are two things I'm not doing: addictions and trauma.
And guess what you're doing?
Yes, I'm not doing addictions, but I am doing trauma. And the whole time I'm like, no, I'm not doing this. But it really came for me, it came and got me. I practiced as a trauma therapist for a while, encountered my own mental health challenges. I had a thriving business, but the challenges of running that business were such that I decided to exit that business. And when I was thinking about mental health and business together in my experience and what I'd heard from other business owners, my business mind and my mental health mind had a baby. And that's how the entrepreneur's therapist was born.
Ah.
because there aren't mental health professionals who understand the impact of entrepreneurship on your mental health and what to do about it. And then the final step, coming to the trauma of money, as I'm thinking about supporting entrepreneurs in their businesses, and I'm doing my continuing professional education, money was the missing piece. And I started to think about money mindset. I came across a training called The Trauma of Money. I'm a certified trauma of money facilitator, and I teach on the faculty now. It was the missing piece.
So, in what way was it the missing piece?
Well, when you're in business for yourself, money's the goal. Not necessarily money in a greedy way, but if you're
Right.
in business, your business has to pay your salary. You have to pay your people. It's a survival issue, right? But there are many people, oh, I'm not in it for the money. I just want to support people with their brands. I just want to fix cars. I just want to help people. It's not sustainable to do those things
That's
when
right.
your flow of money in and out
Right.
is not cared for. Your business is going to fail. You got to get right with your money. But what prevents people, not only business people, but everyday people, from getting right with their money is the shame we feel, whether you have it or don't have it, whether you spend it or you save it. Everybody has shame about their money. And when you have shame about your money, you can't look.
Where does the shame come from?
Well, this is such a good question. There are two sources. The umbrella source is living under capitalism. Capitalism is a system that places profit over people, and wealth is the number one goal.
Yes.
Under capitalism, worth and safety are tied to money.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
safety, because if you don't have money, you're going to starve and die. It's straight
Right.
up, right? If you don't have money, people will judge you about it. But then also, if you do have money, if you're rich, people will say bad things about you as well. So your sense of self-worth and your sense of safety under capitalism are constantly under attack. So that puts you in this kind of like fear kind of state, and
Yeah.
nothing I can do is right. And then we have the personal financial advice that's taught under a capitalist system, which was set up by a bunch of middle-aged white guys with privilege and power and academic education who have a certain point of view. Again, wealth is the ultimate goal.
Yeah.
And then they give you a system that says how to accomplish wealth, but it assumes that you have money to begin with. It assumes that you experience no barriers. It's a formula you're supposed to be able to apply, but the formula doesn't apply, for example, if you're a woman.
So, just as an FYI, I actually did some of my graduate work in economic sociology. And we could have a whole nother podcast on
I'm sure.
capitalism. But I always go back to Milton Friedman, who said the only obligation of a company is to make money for its stockholders.
That's under the law. That's correct. And in fact, they're in violation of the law if they do
When they
anything
don't.
different.
There's no such thing as altruism and,
Yep.
all those beautiful terms. But the interesting thing that I've always found is that people who are in the wealthy category love to say, hey, everybody's equal. Everybody has the same access. Wrong. There's a huge difference between equal and equitable.
Yes, I agree.
And do you think the lack of being equitable plays into this shame factor?
Yes, 100%. Yes, because we get all these messages from the dominant culture about how we should be with money. But when we're in a position of disequity, when we are facing barriers and systems of oppression, we can't get to the place where we can begin to apply those things.
When you're talking about the shame of money, what kind of behaviors does that lead to?
Well, for one thing, how do you feel when you feel ashamed? When you experience shame, what is your impulse, your first impulse?
Well, I've certainly had periods in my life where I avoided the mail. I didn't even want to look at the mail because that meant either bills or, that maybe I couldn't afford to pay. I've certainly had periods of what I would consider to be a little bit of compulsive spending to
Sure. Mm-hmm.
justify, hey, let me feel better. I'll go buy this.
You know it. Yeah.
I always used to say it seemed like the less money I had, the more I spent.
It's a possibility, true. Well, part of it is proportionate
Yeah,
because we feel like we're spending a lot because in proportion to what we have, it is. But on an objective level, it isn't. I love how you gave those examples. Coming back to shame, like shame is a feeling inside. For me, I feel like I go, like I shrink way down low. I crunch in, I close my eyes, I squinch my face up. I kind of like, go to one side and cover like I want to be small and I don't want anybody to see me. And when you feel small like that and you feel powerless and you don't want anybody to see you, then you will avoid the mail. Yes, you'll be afraid to look at your bank balance, but more than that, you'll be afraid to ask for help.
yes.
Because the opposite of shame is belonging. The antidote to shame is kind, compassionate, caring ways of being.
Right,
But when you're in shame, it's like you're judging yourself, you're afraid others are judging you. When you're in that position, it's very hard to reach out, it's very hard to be proactive. So you'll also overspend, like you said, overspend out of distress in an attempt to soothe the distress that you're feeling.
right. We tend to feel, at least my own experience, you feel like no one else in the world is going to understand what you're going through.
100%.
This is a big, 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 dark, dirty secret.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're going to act like all is fine. And, I don't think I've ever equated those feelings with the word shame. I've always called it avoidance.
Sure. Well, sure.
But avoidance clearly is a behavior of shame.
Sure, because it's to try and keep yourself safe. You don't want to have to feel any more shame. You don't want to have to engage with it because you just know you're going to feel worse. So, like, don't pay attention. Yeah. So there's a credit union in Canada called Coast Financial, and they did a study on shame and money. They found that 37% of the people they surveyed felt shame around their money, and 70-some% of people they surveyed felt worries. So, like, we know that lots of people feel shame around their money. Like, 75% of people can't have not enough money. So clearly the worries, it's a human condition to have these experiences. And when
Right.
I present workshops on the trauma of money, the first thing I ask at the beginning is, and I do it anonymously, who here has felt shame about their money? And every time I give the workshop and ask that question, the poll comes out to 90% or more.
Wow.
So it's a human experience, I would say. It's not a dark, dirty secret. Almost everybody you know has got something going on around their money. It's just that we don't talk about it. So then we think we're alone and there's something wrong with us. And so the value then of talking about it is that we get to understand, hey, wait a minute, it's not me. And then when we start to see, well, it's actually not me, it's actually a lot of people, how could all these people be affected by this one thing? And then you start looking at the systems and structures in place, and then you go, oh, so it's actually not a problem with us, it's a problem with the system.
The root of it, most certainly in my mind, would be systemic institutions and policies and things like that. But are there common denominators amongst the people who are suffering shame
No.
aside from systemic? It's for all different reasons.
Yeah.
And is there a gender bias, so to speak, where more women suffer from this than men?
I don't have any data about that, so I
Mm,
couldn't really say.
yeah. Interesting.
What's hard for women, though, is that the gender role stereotype says women are not supposed to take up space. We're not supposed to ask for anything. We're not supposed to be bold. The financial advice to women is save more, spend less. Stop having your Starbucks, honey. That's how you'll get your mortgage payment. Where the financial advice to men is make the big ask, negotiate your salary, right? So there are gender differences. I'm not certain about how they play out in respect of shame.
How did your trauma play into your ability to actually understand firsthand the trauma of money?
I thought for a long time that I was bad with money until I understood the messages that led me to believe that. two really important messages. The main one is I have dyscalculia, which is a math learning disability. But I'm 60. So when I was in school, they didn't know from anything, not even learning disabilities. The ways it impacts me, for example, is my working memory doesn't work, so I can't memorize. So I couldn't memorize my times tables. Because I couldn't remember them, it was assumed that I didn't practice and that I wasn't trying. And so I was publicly shamed for not knowing my times tables when the problem was my brain doesn't work that way. As I'm telling this story, I can feel a little bit teary about it because this is the other thing. I've seen memes on the internet, about being screamed at about your math homework, like it's a joke, but except one of my parents got right in my face and was screaming at me because I was supposed to be doing remedial work over the holidays and I didn't understand. They gave me tutoring. I got extra help from the teacher. Something was wrong with me. And one of the greatest healing moments is when I realized I'm not bad with money. I'm bad with numbers. And I'm bad with numbers. It's not my fault. I have a learning disability. So that got me out of the shame of something wrong with me. And it enabled me to ask when I didn't understand so that I could do the things I needed to do. Because I had no shame about it. I feel kind of a little like tingy, a little vulnerable around it. But when I say, I'm sorry, I have a math learning disability, can you explain that again to me in a different way? Whereas when you're in shame, like you just go, okay. And then you go away and you can't do the thing, right?
Yeah.
So that was
sure.
the big thing, was understanding that there's nothing wrong with me. I have a math learning disorder. And then the second part was understanding the systemic nature of the banking system and the financial systems and personal finance advice. And even the financial system, for example, it's set up to make money. So I have a friend, I tell this story all the time. This is public information. It's not a private story. She has ADHD. She made a mistake in her math so that she was off by, I don't know, a couple dollars. And that meant that a payment came out and she was NSF. She got caught in a back and forth NSF loop between the bank and the vendor. So she ended up with $700 in NSF fees. She'd had the money to pay the bill in the first place. But because of the challenges she experienced around her executive functioning and being able to track dates and keep track, and like if she had been given the opportunity to rectify that mistake without all the automated systems going ding, 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 and being unable to interrupt, she wouldn't have had $700 in NSF fees. That's an example of a systemic barrier that's in the very everyday life of all of us.
Right.
I imagine some of the people listening are thinking, well, you should have a bounce protection. Except if you don't have credit, you can't have bounce protection. So you may still have the money for the stupid bill, but there are so many systems set up to penalize you for not having what they assume you should have.
And that itself creates another trauma.
It does, absolutely. What we know is chronic stress accumulates. It potentiates, like it amplifies each continuous stressor, amplifies, and then the system starts to break down. Chronic stress in some cases can lead to PTSD. And then when you have the memories of all these stressors and bad events, and you open up your banking app to pay your bills and stuff, you can be flooded. And this is what used to happen to me. And it would take me all day to do my bookkeeping in my business because my palms were sweaty, my mouth was dry, I was nauseous and shaky, and I couldn't concentrate, which if you've got a learning disorder and you're trying to do math and you can't concentrate. So it took me all day to do my business bookkeeping because I was so flooded by the memories and the emotions of all the stressful things that had happened to me around money in the past. The healing now is that I can do it in about, a couple hours, and I'm relaxed and okay about it.
How did you get to that point?
Well, I did a whole bunch of work on my own coming into the Trauma of Money program. I took the program, and then a person with whom I made friends in the program, she and I have been talking about money every day since that program. So it's been about 3.5 years that every day we share our money shame, our money wins, our big asks, the mistakes and the lessons, and we really celebrate We do all the things that you're not supposed to do in the bigger world. And especially having a person who could receive my shame with love and care was the most healing thing. Because now I have fault tolerance. Instead of feeling shame when I make a mistake, I go, oh, that was a mistake. Let me see what happened. Let me see what I need to do next. Instead of saying, I made a mistake. Well, I'm no good with money. I'm a piece of bleep. I might as well just give up. I'm a worthless human being. See you later.
There was a time where I even tried to do my own taxes.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
And I thought, well, this is simple. I mean, there's nothing complicated here. 8 hours later, I was sobbing. I could not make sense of it. I could not. And all I kept saying was, you are so stupid, Stacey. You are so stupid. Everybody else can do this. What is wrong with you that you can't do this? And it actually put me in a position where I went several years of not filing my taxes because...
Who would want to go through that?
And I did not have the money to hire some big fancy CPA. Fortunately for me, I didn't owe the government any money, so I didn't suffer these extreme penalties and things like that. But it was a principle that it was so traumatic, it took me a long time before I would even try it again. And it wasn't even a situation of anything but trying to do it on what was supposed to be a simple online system. So I didn't use any particular coping skills for that. I just, every year I'd go, I think they're going to owe me money. And I would laugh and I'd say, hey, as long as they owe me, I'll never be broke. And, things like that. So you were talking about your trauma. And, I'm always interested in what I call financial control, because I think there's ways in which we are controlled financially by partners or children as adults. I've seen it, as a case manager in the hospital for many years. I worked with so many seniors and elderly people, and I could tell you in 3 seconds by behaviors who is being controlled financially by children or by not even necessarily a married partner, but a partner, or by some other individual. Have you had any experience with that personally, or?
Oh, sure. Anybody who's been in an abusive relationship will have experienced financial abuse. In my story, it took place in the context of my first marriage, which was an abusive relationship. And so, for example, he refused to get a job. For a long time, he had a particular view of the work that he thought was appropriate for him, and he wouldn't take any other work. I was the only one working. I got pregnant by accident, and my birth control failed. I was very sick, and I worked through the entire pregnancy while he didn't. At the same time, I was responsible for managing the household finances, and then was subject to all kinds of shaming and blaming and criticism for the decisions I was making. I was also told that I spent too much money. I was too much of a spender, but yet I was the one who did the shopping and the groceries and managed all the expenditures related to housekeeping, of which he had no understanding. I didn't understand that it was financial abuse until after I had left. And I was staying in the shelter, and they gave us the power and control wheel. And I understood that their abuse occurs in many different ways, one aspect of which is financial abuse. I only began to understand the impact of that once I had a business. I knew that having a business and having a successful business, I needed to get my money stuff straight. And I started to look at money mindset work and began to understand more about the emotional side of things and how that affects our behavior with money. And in that context, then, I really saw how the financial abuse I had experienced, not only in my intimate relationship, but also in my family and as a result of the bad math experiences at school, how that had affected my behavior with money in the past and how I could do things differently in the future. Another thing that's really typical, not in the abusive relationship that I was in, but in the second relationship, and that many women will hear, is that as the person who's responsible for running the household, you buy the groceries, you go to the pharmacy, you buy the kids' clothes, you buy the kids, you pay for all the stuff at school. Like
Right.
you're the one who actually does the shopping for these things. Then you are told by the person who has no idea what you've been doing or what it costs to support the family. They'll tell you you're too much of a shopper, you buy too much, you spend too much. I've heard that in 2 of my 3 relationships, and I've had clients who've heard that. I've had friends who heard that. And that's not even in the context of an abusive relationship that we will hear that kind of abusive treatment or toxic treatment from our partner about our money responsibilities, because their money shtick is they don't want to have anything to do with money. So they put it on you, and then they shame and blame you without wanting to take any responsibility for any of it or participate in any way. This is a very common dynamic in heterosexual relationships. So that's an example of withholding money.
Yeah, that's the one that I think we all assume is the only form of financial control. Because you have all these people where, and I see it with women all the time, especially for widows,
Yes.
who, when they lose their spouse, they don't know a thing about what's going on with the money.
Well, that's the flip side is financial control, where the woman gives all her money over. And it's funny, it's not about who has the money, it's about the power.
Right.
All abuse in intimate relationships is about power and control.
Yes.
So when a man abdicates all responsibility for the money, he's in the position of power because he's the boss who criticizes the worker who's responsible for everything. But the flip side is also true. They hand over all the money to the men. The man has the control of the money and decides what's done, and the woman doesn't have any spending money of her own, or that women are given allowances for the groceries, but it's a completely unrealistic allowance, and then they get in trouble. And in abusive relationships where women need to leave, part of keeping them in the relationship is that they have no access to money. Even when they have a job, the direct deposit now for their pay will go into the account over which the husband has entire control.
So, what would your advice be to women who are in those relationships? What can they do?
This is a feature of abuse in heterosexual relationships, especially intimate relationship abuse. Part of the tactic and the net impact of that is to disempower you and to make you feel hopeless, to make you believe you're stupid, incompetent, incapable, couldn't survive without the person. And of course, you have shame around this. Like I considered myself a feminist at the time I was in an abusive relationship. And I thought that when I argued and fought back, that meant I wasn't. It took me a long time to understand. And it was only after I left that I had the perspective to understand the true nature of what was happening in that relationship. Because as women, like, let's say you're working at a bank and you're a VP at a bank, but all your money goes to your husband and he's the
Right.
controller of everything. How do you tell anybody? So he's created the conditions under which you're too ashamed to say anything, to get help, to get out. So first of all, I just want to say, to validate the listener who's struggling to leave, on average, it takes 7 years for a woman to get out. And that's because the whole purpose of the abuse and the situation is to keep you from leaving. And you're struggling against a structure that's intended to keep you in. So what I would recommend, first and foremost, is to find someone in whom you can confide. It might take you time. You know who's around you. You know how they are as people. You know the kind people. You maybe even know the people who have been through similar things. Find a friend. They can help you because with support, you are stronger and you can identify the steps you need. The other thing I would say is contact your local women's shelter because they have people who can talk you through the steps. Another little thing you can do is have a secret stash, right? And start building up your secret stash. My husband's mother, that's what she did. She finally managed to get a little job and it took her years to save enough money to get a deposit for an apartment, but she did it. Use your 7 years to bit by bit build your plan. It's baby steps.
Do you find in your experience, not only as a survivor, but also as a therapist, do you find that financial control is just one component of intimate partner abuse? Does it
Sure. Yes.
escalate
Yes.
into
Yes.
other forms?
Yes. Well, actually, I wouldn't say that financial abuse escalates per se. I would say abuse in general intensifies over time. There's a very well-known tool called the Wheel of Power and Control. It's a wheel that's broken into pie-shaped sections. Each section describes an aspect of domestic violence. The hub is the physical abuse, and then the spokes of the wheel are all the different aspects that instill fear and control, one of which is financial abuse.
Is there a decided difference regarding the trauma of money and experience based on those generational divides?
What I'm seeing, technically, I'm a boomer, but I was born in 1964, which means that I came into my sense of myself in the mid early 70s. So I'm more on Gen X, I think that is,
Yeah.
latchkey kids. And so from there till now, what I see is that what we would call the kids now, the 20s and 30s now, are
Yeah.
much less willing to accept bullshit, much more willing to go, something's wrong here. Let me figure it out. And so when they begin to get an inkling, they go, wait a minute, something's wrong here. Let me look at that. And so when they come to that point, then they start seeking out support. And what's really beautiful, there are so many folks now thinking about money differently. There's the trauma of money. There's Hadassah Damien. And there's a woman, Dana Miranda, who wrote a book called You Don't Need a Budget. And there's a bunch of people who are thinking really differently about money, specifically for folks who don't have money, women, people of color, and how they can navigate the system that's set against them. Those are the changes that I've seen.
So, as a baby boomer myself, I know I just couldn't possibly look like one, but in all seriousness, I have always had almost a judgmental view
Uh-huh.
of friends or family, and they tell me they have separate bank accounts. I'd say, "Well, why are you married?" Like I had this whole
Yes, yes.
dynamic going of where I was taught, you're married, you share your resources. I used to tease my husband all the time. I'd say, hey, what's mine is mine, what's yours is mine, what's ours is mine, it's all mine. And we would joke about that. But the truth is, I never would have dreamed of having like his money, my money, and then we, decide who's going to pay what. But as I learn more and more about how controlled we have all been financially, systemically, or, one on one, I do see the value in that. Have you found that you can still be controlled by your partner?
Well, sure. Power and control can show up anywhere. It can show
Yeah,
up anywhere in any way. Right? If
yeah,
you're shamed and blamed, if you're berated all the time, like for example, I was the one who was earning the money in my first relationship, the abusive one. He wanted a Jeep. I didn't want to sign. He didn't have the credit. He also didn't have a job. And he bullied me for days and days and days and days. It was endless. It was like 10 days or maybe 2 weeks of just constant, like, I was in a fog, really. I was
wow.
so ultimately, I just couldn't take it anymore. After 2 weeks, and I co-signed the stupid loan agreement, and he got the Jeep. At the time, I was not aware that I was in an abusive relationship. I took that situation in isolation, that he was just behaving badly. So that's an example of how, like I said, I had my own money. I was running the budget, but I was still being controlled financially. What's healthy is for each person to have money that's theirs to do whatever they want with. It doesn't have to be an astonishing amount. It just has to be your money for whatever you want. And if you want to save that money, who cares? If you want to spend that money, who cares? But you have to have something of your own so that you can do what you want with it.
We were talking about financial control of, especially women in our age group and older
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
by children.
mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on that? Because I happen to actually see it quite often. I'll see people, even in my own business, like where they'll say, well, I need to check with my children,
Yeah,
or,
yeah.
my daughter said this, or my son said that. And what do you think about that?
I think it's complicated. I think in some cases, the children are acting in good faith. I think in some cases, it's a question of ageism. You and I could, I'm sure, have a whole different episode on the harms that are caused by ageist practices and assumptions and beliefs. And one of the big assumptions in ageism is people get stupid. And so the children might think I'm smarter. They start to infantilize the parent and they think I'm smarter. And it's patronizing. It's not from a bad place.
Right.
But it's also not from an empowering place.
Right.
So it could be that. It could be straight up financial abuse and behaving emotionally, abusively, and coercively over the parent to get control of their money, which then falls in the big context of elder abuse. That's a whole nother social and cultural issue, elder abuse, that is becoming, of course, as there are more and more of us, it's becoming more and more of a problem.
Yeah. And, I always say just because I don't have the technological savvy that members of my team have, it doesn't mean I'm not capable of running a business or my life. It would be like, well, I don't do accounts payable and receivable. That doesn't mean I'm stupid. It's just not my strength.
Yeah. And it's also not the best use of your time.
Right, exactly. But I think that a lot of times children, and I love your word, infantilize us because we don't know how to operate technology as well as they do.
Sure, they make assumptions. Yeah. And that's ageism. People thinking that because you're old, the fact that you can't do something is a function of your elderly infirmity and not simply you just have not been exposed to it yet.
Right. When I was growing up, I learned how to type on a manual typewriter.
Me too.
And it was a big deal when we got those electric IBM
Yes,
Selectrics.
I
And
remember
was just like,
those.
yeah.
Yep.
But, today, things are so different with how we do it. And I always feel like the younger generation doesn't appreciate how many changes our generation has been through.
I really don't think
So many technological changes. So I actually think we've done darn well. But
I'll say,
what advice would you give because we have a lot of women who will listen to this podcast, I believe, who may actually even have more issues with children trying to control their finances than they even do with spouses.
Yeah, I would say get help. The first step in changing anything is to get help. And it doesn't have to be a therapist. It can be your best friend next door or the woman in the room next to you if you're in a residence, and you pull her aside and you have an intimate tea together and you say, I'm feeling really uneasy and uncomfortable. I'm going to take a risk. I hope that it's okay to take that risk with you. I'd like to share something with you. And you just start talking to one person. Pick somebody is going to be nice and safe.
Right.
And just take that baby step. If you have access to supports, like if you're interacting with a hospital social worker, if there's somebody in any of the organizations that you belong to, if you go to church and it's your pastor, like it doesn't have to be a therapist. It doesn't have to be somebody who deals with elder abuse. Although if you wanted to reach out to those would be a great first step. But if you're afraid to, find a trusted friend and start there. Just talk to somebody. In terms of early warning signs, I would say trust your gut. If you feel like something's off, you don't have to take action right in that moment, but you could pay attention to what you think is happening. Pay attention to what might not be working. The thing about financial abuse is it's a double whammy because, first of all, there's a money taboo in society. We don't talk about money. And also, we don't talk about the abuse we're experiencing, let alone the fact that we're experiencing financial abuse. And so we don't have a good context for what is normal. And today we have so many resources. You can look up what is a healthy financial relationship? What do healthy finances look like in a marriage? What is financial control, and get the information that you need in a non-risky way. And you can then take a look at what's happening for you and compare that to the information. And that can lead you to conclusions. Either things are fine or they're not fine. The early warning signs are so widespread. There are so many of them. I would just recommend doing a search and getting the information, taking that in, applying it to your situation, and then making a decision for yourself. Because when things are not right, we know they're not right. We have just been taught not to trust our gut. And so the first sign is something's not right about the money in this house. And I want to learn more about it. I want to understand more.
Hold that thought. We'll be right back after this message.
Ready to trade ordinary for extraordinary? At Sisterhood Travels, we turn bucket lists into unforgettable adventures with group travel specifically for women 45 and up. Picture yourself exploring vibrant cultures and making lifelong friends along the way. Join our community of fearless women and start your next chapter full of joy, discovery, and sisterhood. Visit sisterhoodtravels.com and say yes to your next adventure.
Let's dive right back in. Here we go. How does scarcity, like so many women, especially in our age group,
Yeah.
have grown up, even if they themselves were not a product of scarcity, perhaps their parents were.
Yes. Yes.
And so how does that play into all this? Especially like we hear so much about, the scarcity mentality versus the abundance mentality.
Yeah. Yeah.
How does scarcity play into all this?
Our entire economy and the concept of economics is based on the assumption that resources are scarce. We live under capitalism, which also has the idea that resources are scarce and that people should grab what they can because there's not enough. So you can get the idea that there's not enough of something completely independent of your own personal lived experience. So that's number one. Number two is if you've grown up in poverty, you'll have experience of scarcity. If you've lived in poverty as an adult, you'll have that, your nervous system will have the memory that there weren't enough resources to survive. If you started a business in the early phases of business, money is scarce, you've got scarcity, you've got those memories, right? There's a specific psychology around scarcity that impacts our behavior. Elder Shafir has a great TED Talk.
I want to talk to you about the psychology of scarcity, the psychology that comes with not having enough.
I saw that maybe 4 years ago, the video, and I didn't realize the degree of shame I still carried around that until I saw the video and understood what was happening in my mind when I was feeling scarcity, experiencing scarcity. Scarcity is a survival thing.
Right.
So you're in fear for your survival when you're experiencing scarcity. So the only thing your mind is concerned about is surviving. And so it can't think long term. Your capacity to put your attention and take action on long-term goals is inhibited. That's called goal inhibition. When you're in the tunnel, you have to engage in trade-off thinking. It's like having a suitcase too small. It's like now when you go on the plane and right? You have to think already, well, if I take this, then I have to, the cost of include. So you're in this tunnel, in scarcity, trying to figure out what am I going to do with what? You're trading things off. All of these have an impact on your cognitive capacity. So then you end up having a tax on your bandwidth, your mental bandwidth, which means then you're likely to make impulse decisions, which is another kind of tax because your brain is taxed. You make bad decisions and you suffer the consequences of those bad decisions. And then the stress is so intense that you're going to only do what attends in the moment to alleviate your distress. But what we from outside don't understand about the psychology of scarcity is that it's a survival instinct and it will overtake reasonable, rational behavior. And it happens whether you really do have scarcity or even if you only think or remember.
Isn't COVID a perfect example of that? I feel like how everybody went bonkers buying up all the paper towels and the toilet paper, and they were petrified they weren't going to be able to get any. And what they did was they started hoarding it.
Yes.
So other people actually couldn't get it. And prices escalated. It was crazy.
Yep.
So I can see where that almost becomes kind of an epidemic. Like
it does. Yeah. Well, I would say scarcity psychology impacts us all to varying degrees at all times, at least in North America, right? So the answer is to be aware of the conditions that create the scarcity in you. So first of all, is acknowledging we all experience scarcity and it comes at any time and it affects us. And then to practice noticing, oh, I'm anxious. I'm remembering these things. I feel the emotions in my body. I hear the thoughts. There's not enough. Let me take a moment to be with myself and to say, oh, of course you're feeling scared and anxious. Of course, you're distressed. This is your body's survival response. There's nothing wrong with you. And I'm going to pause and take a breath. It's okay to be scared. Everybody who's experiencing scarcity would feel scared. And then you say to yourself, I'm with you. You're not alone. I've got you. I'm here. And then you will find that your nervous system is soothed enough for you to be able to think, okay, what is my very next right step here? And then you would have a repertoire of skills, like you might take a walk around the house in order to discharge your physical energy. You might call a friend to talk you off the cliff. You might have a hot cup of tea just to gather yourself and start again.
What's your advice for women who have been through some of the things you've been through, or they're going through their own financial control issues? Through what strategies can they heal to the degree that they value themselves and their worth outside of that control?
That's a big question. Trauma recovery is a journey. I left that relationship 28 years ago. Where I am now is the result of 28 years of work, first on my trauma recovery and then on my money. So any step in the direction of recovery is a good step. Any step you can take in the direction of getting the message that there's nothing wrong with you, that you are feeling the way we would expect anybody who's been through what you've been through to feel, and to develop the kind and tender relationship with yourself. Like you said, our tendency is to shit talk ourselves. You're stupid.
Yeah.
Why can't you do this? Everybody else can do this. What's the matter with you?
Right.
All that kind of like shitty self-talk. Cultivating the kind, compassionate relationship with yourself, who, for example, when you're telling yourself you're stupid, you can say, oh, I'm struggling here. This is why the voice is coming to tell me I'm stupid, because I'm not stupid, but I'm struggling. I'm having a hard time.
Right.
Let me take care of the part of me that's having a good time.
Yeah.
To be able to relate to yourself in that way is the foundation you want to set for the rest of the steps. And any warm person can help you develop that relationship with yourself. Of course, therapy, yes, but even a warm friend who relates to you warmly, you can ask her for help to relate to yourself warmly.
I know that there are many therapists who are starting to really specialize in trauma, but are there actually therapists that, aside from, someone like yourself, throughout the North America, are there therapists who are actually specializing in the trauma of money?
Yes. So if you go to the traumaofmoney.com, there's an alumni directory, and all the folks who are therapists who've gone through the Trauma of Money program are listed on that directory. That would be where I would start. The second possibility is that financial therapy now is a discipline in the US. So you can search for financial therapist in my area. And the first thing I would do when you're interviewing a financial therapist to work with is ask them, do you have training? Not do you understand trauma, but are you trained in trauma treatment? And that will help you make your decision.
What's your definition of resilience?
The capacity to advance your projects despite adversity. This comes from research done in Australia. It's called the PR6 resilience scale. That resilience is actually a set of skills that we can develop.
Right.
Now, of course, some of us have more of those skills because we have more advantages. There are the social determinants that support people in having more resilience skills from their growing up and from their experience, and some folks have less. And I want to acknowledge that fact, that there is the basic social differences and barriers that have an impact on people's capacity to develop resilience skills. But even when you start at a deficit, there are a series of skills that you can learn and practice so that you can use those skills when you confront adversity and want to continue to advance the things that are meaningful for you.
You talked much earlier about having meningitis, and being in healthcare for so long, I know how traumatic that can be for people, especially when you don't know if it's viral or bacterial or what have you.
Yeah.
Do you want to share what you went through with that trauma?
When was happening, I don't. But afterwards, once I became aware of what was going on, I remembered that there was that 24-hour period where we didn't know what it was, whether I was going to live or die, because we didn't know if
Right.
it was going to be bacterial or viral. So it was traumatizing. Just the whole experience of being that deeply ill is traumatic. And anybody who goes through a medical crisis, it can be traumatizing to their nervous system.
Absolutely.
But then afterwards, what I found was most difficult was the extraordinary depression, the fatigue, the deep fatigue. And also, I had a time where I was thinking of taking my life. I've had a couple times in my life where I thought about taking my life. One time I had a plan. This time I didn't have a plan. But having been there already before, I knew what was going on. That's part of how I ended up in therapy, was I was able to ask for help. The other thing about it was, as one trauma can do, if you're unrecovered from your other traumas, it just opened the box inside me of all the other traumas I'd been through. And I was flooded with all kinds of distress. So it opened the gate. It was a gift ultimately, because when it opened the gate, then it destabilized me to the point that I was like, well, I can't, I cannot keep going this way. I have to get help. And then, as I say, it was just such a gift to be referred to a therapist who understood trauma and was able to help me recover.
Have you ever considered what would have happened had you not been referred to a trauma specialist?
Well, I would have stumbled along, functioning, but also in distress for who knows how long.
Right.
I would certainly not be having the business I have today, because I don't know if I would have had the courage to go back to school to begin with.
What made you go back to school?
I got injured at the job I was doing. I was a translator from French to English, and I had a typing injury, and I couldn't continue to do that job, and I had to do my own occupational rehab. And so, as I mentioned, I started school in social work when I was 19, but I didn't finish. It's a whole long story how I ended up as a translator. I said, it's time for me to go back to where I started and carry out the dream that I had. So that's when I went back to school.
How rewarding was that?
It was great. I
Yes.
wanted to graduate before I was 50, and I did it.
Bravo.
Thank
I will
you.
tell you, I went back to school when I was 30. I went back again when I was 40. And I went back again when I was 50. And you know what? If I had an extra hour in my day, which I do not, I wouldn't mind going back to school now.
Right? I want a PhD too. Yes.
But I love learning.
Yeah.
And there's certain topics that I'm so passionate about.
Yes.
Where do you think your passion for helping women and even entrepreneurs and trauma, all these topics, where do you think that comes from inside of you?
Well, my understanding of my purpose here is that I'm here to shine light into a world that can seem like sometimes a very dark place. And my vision is for a world where people in distress would be met with love. I feel a little bit vulnerable because it just sounds like such a jumped up thing. But at the same time, the truth of it is, I just feel the truth of it in me. And it's not, I guess what I would say is, it's not personal. It's not like only I can do this. We all can do this. But to shine that love into this world, to bring love through the practice of nonviolence, through me and through my being, into the world around me and into the people whose lives I touch and the people I work with. And for me, I'm called to do it, to bring that love through.
You make me feel emotional because I don't think this sounds like a jacked up explanation, number one. I hurt, truly hurt, when other people are hurting.
Yes.
And I'm not a therapist. I'll never be a therapist, but I have a different calling. And my calling started when I was a little girl. I have always been an advocate for women's rights and human rights and economic and social justice. And this goes beyond politics, but it absolutely drives just about everything I do. And sometimes there's such a conflict. The economic need to make money to survive, to avoid scarcity, to avoid shame, it's like this thing. And then the flip side saying, you know what? I don't care what I have or do not have. There's so many people out there that need my help. And right now, I feel so blessed that I have the opportunity to share stories like yours and mine and of so many other women who are what I consider to be ordinary women facing extraordinary challenging situations and healing from them, showing how resilient they are. And so I love what you're saying. How do you define acceptance of yourself? Let's go with yourself. Like, how do you accept yourself?
It's a kind of saying hello. When I first encountered the idea, I thought there were things inside myself that I couldn't accept. And I thought accepting meant that they were good.
Yeah.
And I learned that I could accept, in other words, I could say hello to the part of me that doesn't want to accept something else in me. I can say hello to the part of me that, for example, doesn't want to accept that I'm upset about something.
Right.
Just the saying hello is a first step in self-acceptance or self-kindness. Oh, I see what's happening here. It's the attitude implicit in curiosity and saying hello that is, in my opinion, embodying the acceptance. It's a practice of acceptance.
What do you think the greatest lesson is for you over your 28 years of healing? Or, well, really longer, but
Yes.
what do you think is the biggest lesson for you about your journey of healing and not being controlled by the trauma of money?
My greatest lesson is around the shame and being kind to myself. I still feel shame, but now instead of shrinking and hiding and amplifying the shame and the inner critic ganging up on me with that whole situation, I know now to go, oh, look, oh, honey, it's okay. I gotcha.
Do you feel like there are steps that women can take who are currently in marriages, let's say, or partnerships, or with children, living with their children, where they don't really have control of their money? What are the first steps that they can take that are actually maybe non-therapy based, but where they can actually get their control back?
Well, the first thing is you're living in a situation that has led you to believe you have no control. I would invite you to be curious. Do I have control though? Let me think about the ways in which I do have control, even if it's just a little thing. To know that you've got this thought and you've been told over and over again you've got no control, to recognize it as a thought and to start to be curious about how much it's true and how much it's not true, and finding the ways it's not true and seeing if you can take those and amplify them.
Are there resources for women who may not have the money or their money's being controlled to get therapeutic help?
You would have to check in your community. Usually the women's shelter can give you some help, and you can consult them. There are often community mental health organizations that
Right.
offer support. And a lot of community centers, the same ones that give the free tax prep, will often have free financial literacy courses. And when you take the free course, you can check with the person and let them know kind of the support you need, and they can direct you in the right way.
Right.
Your doctor's office might be able to direct you about where
Oh.
you might be able to access free mental health care. There are lots of community resources that you can check. And if you're stuck, you can send me an email and I will do my best to support you in giving you a couple of ideas. You have to let me know where you are, obviously, and I can do a little bit of research and we can do a bit of brainstorming and I can connect you with something local in your area.
Well, it's a very, very generous give, but I think that's, goes with how kind you are. And is there anything else that you'd like for us and our listeners to know that may be really important to this whole situation surrounding the trauma of money?
I'll repeat what I've said before because it is so, so important. There's nothing wrong with you. the way you're feeling is what we would expect anybody who's been through what you've been through to feel. There's absolutely nothing wrong with you.
Well, I will tell you, that actually lifts my spirit. There's nothing wrong with me.
No, nothing wrong with the way you feel, nothing wrong with what you're going through.
And I hope our listeners really, really get that.
Yes, I hope so too.
Yeah, yeah. I cannot thank you enough for such an enlightening conversation and sharing your personal journey. And I think this is going to help so many of our listeners. If you liked this show, please be sure to like us, follow us, subscribe to us, give us a review, because it really helps grow our podcast.